The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile waiting room of the Riverside County Superior Court, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Emma Martinez sat perfectly still in a child-sized plastic chair, her tiny legs dangling. Inches from the ground, clutching a threadbare stuffed elephant that had seen better days. The toy's left ear hung by a single thread, its once bright orange fabric now faded to a dull rust color from countless nights of fearful squeezing. Detective Sarah Chun watched the 3-year-old from across the room, her heart breaking a little more with each passing minute. 4 months had crawled by since that horrific October night when Emma's world shattered into a million pieces. 4 months of absolute silence from a child who once chattered endlessly about butterflies, her favorite cartoon characters, and the imaginary tea parties she hosted for her stuffed animals. Now, Emma existed in a cocoon of traumatic muteness, her dark eyes holding depths of pain that no child should ever carry. The courthouse's victim services coordinator, Mrs. Patricia Valdez, had tried everything in her 20-year career to reach traumatized children, but Emma remained unreachable. Coloring books lay untouched on the small table beside her. A box of crayons sat unopened, their waxy tips still perfectly pointed. Even the therapy dog visits that usually worked miracles with other children had failed to elicit so much as a whisper from Emma's pale lips. Dr. Amanda Foster, the county's leading child psychologist, knelt down beside Emma's chair for the 3rd time that morning, her voice gentle and coaxing. "Emma, sweetheart, would you like to tell me about your elephant? He looks like he's been a very good friend to you." The little girl's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the worn toy, but her gaze remained fixed on an invisible spot somewhere beyond the wall-mounted television playing silent cartoons. Detective Chun shifted uncomfortably in her adult-sized chair, the weight of the case pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Marcus Webb, Emma's stepfather, sat in a holding cell just 3 floors below, probably confident that his freedom was all but guaranteed. Without Emma's testimony, the prosecution's case would crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The physical evidence was compelling. Maria Martinez's medical records painted a picture of systematic abuse that had escalated to near-fatal violence. But domestic violence cases lived or died on witness testimony, and their star witness was a traumatized toddler who refused to speak. The attack had been brutal beyond imagination. Maria Martinez had spent 3 weeks in intensive care, her face so swollen and discolored that Emma hadn't recognized her own mother when social services finally allowed supervised visits. Broken ribs, a punctured lung, internal bleeding. The emergency room doctors had whispered among themselves that it was miraculous she had survived. But the physical wounds were healing. The psychological scars on both mother and daughter might never fully fade. Emma had been discovered hiding in her bedroom closet by the first responders. Maria's blood splattered across her frozen-themed pajamas, her tiny body shaking with shock. The paramedics later reported that she had been completely unresponsive, staring straight ahead with wide, unblinking eyes as if witnessing something too terrible to process. A 911 call had come from a neighbor who heard the screaming through the thin apartment walls, but by the time police arrived, Marcus Webb had fled into the night, leaving behind a woman barely clinging to life and a small child who had witnessed every horrifying moment. The waiting room door opened with a soft whoosh, and Prosecutor Janet Kim entered, her usually pristine appearance slightly rumpled from a sleepless night of preparation. She had built her career on putting violent criminals behind bars, but this case had gotten under her skin in a way that few others had. Perhaps it was Emma's resemblance to her own daughter, or maybe it was the sheer helplessness of watching a child's spirit completely shattered by adult cruelty. "Any progress?" Kim asked Detective Chun in hushed tones, though they both knew the answer before it was spoken. Chun shook her head slowly, her experienced eyes never leaving Emma's motionless form. Dr. Foster thinks she's protecting herself by staying silent. Classic trauma response in children this young. She's essentially locked herself away from anything that might force her to relive that night. The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Emma was the prosecution's most crucial witness, the only person who could testify to exactly what Marcus Webb had done to her mother. Yet her trauma made her testimony impossible to obtain. It was a cruel catch-22 that played out in courtrooms across the country every day. The very violence that created the need for justice also destroyed the victim's ability to seek it. Kim glanced at her watch and felt her stomach drop. They had less than 2 hours before Judge Patricia Williams would be forced to dismiss the charges due to insufficient evidence. Webb's expensive defense attorney, Michael Torres, was already preparing his motion, confident that his client would walk free by afternoon. The thought of that monster returning to the streets, possibly even attempting to contact Maria and Emma, made Kim's blood run cold. There has to be something, Kim muttered, more to herself than to Chun. Some way to reach her, to help her understand that she's safe now. Dr. Foster approached them, shaking her head with visible frustration. I've tried every technique in my arsenal. Play therapy, art therapy, even music therapy. She's completely withdrawn into herself. The trauma has created walls that might take years to break down, and we don't have years. Emma continued sitting in perfect stillness, her small chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, her eyes focused on nothing and everything at once. Somewhere deep inside that beautiful, broken little mind, the memories of that terrible night played on an endless loop, the sound of her stepfather's fists connecting with her mother's face, the sickening thud of Maria's body hitting the kitchen floor, the growing pool of crimson spreading across the white linoleum tiles. The courthouse clock chimed 11 o'clock, its deep resonant tones echoing through the building like a countdown to injustice. In exactly 90 minutes, a violent man would walk free, and a brave little girl's silence would become his salvation. The weight of that terrible irony hung in the air like smoke, choking everyone in the room with its bitter taste of impending failure. Emma clutched her elephant tighter and continued her vigil of silence, unaware that time was running out for justice, and that somewhere in the building, an unexpected hero was about to change everything. Officer Jake Rodriguez adjusted his utility belt as he walked through the marble corridors of the Riverside County Superior Court, his polished boots echoing with authority against the cold floor. Beside him, Rex moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his sleek black and tan coat rippling with each powerful stride. The 5-year-old German Shepherd had been Rodriguez's partner for 3 years, and their bond had been forged through countless dangerous situations, drug busts in gang territories, explosive device searches, and high-risk warrant executions, where Rex's keen senses had saved both their lives more times than Rodriguez cared to count. Today's assignment seemed routine by comparison, a standard security sweep of the courthouse before the high-profile Martinez domestic violence case began. Rex's specialized training in narcotics detection made him invaluable for ensuring that no contraband entered the building, especially during emotionally charged proceedings where desperate family members or associates might attempt to smuggle in weapons or drugs. The German Shepherd had an impressive track record, over 200 successful drug seizures, dozens of weapon discoveries, and a detection accuracy rate that made other K-9 units across California envious. Rodriguez had joined the police force 8 years earlier after completing 2 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer. The transition from desert warfare to suburban law enforcement had been challenging, but partnering with Rex had given him a sense of purpose that reminded him of his military working dog experiences overseas. Rex wasn't just a tool or a weapon, he was Rodriguez's closest friend, confidant, and the reason he looked forward to coming to work each day. As they approached the victim services wing, Rex's behavior began to change in subtle ways that only Rodriguez would notice. The dog's ears, normally held at alert attention, started twitching slightly. His nostrils flared wider, processing scents with increased intensity. Most telling of all, his tail, which usually maintained a confident upward curve during work, began to lower and sway in a pattern Rodriguez had never seen before. "What's up, boy?" Rodriguez murmured, instinctively scanning the hallway for potential threats. His hand moved unconsciously toward his service weapon, a habit developed through years of trusting Rex's instincts above his own human senses. If Rex detected something unusual, there was always a reason. Rex's pace slowed as they neared room 247, the victim services waiting area. The German Shepherd's head tilted at an angle that Rodriguez recognized as intense concentration. But there was something else, something softer in the dog's demeanor that seemed almost protective. Rex had encountered thousands of people during their partnership, from hardened criminals to innocent bystanders, but Rodriguez had never seen his partner display this particular combination of alertness and gentle curiosity. Suddenly, Rex stopped completely outside the waiting room door. His massive frame went rigid, every muscle tense with anticipation. A low, barely audible whine escaped his throat, not the sharp, aggressive sound he made when detecting drugs or sensing danger, but something entirely different. It was almost melodic, like a question being asked in a language only he understood. Rodriguez felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. In 3 years of partnership, Rex had never exhibited this type of behavior. The dog was trained to be single-minded in his focus, to ignore distractions and maintain professional composure regardless of circumstances. Yet here he was, pawing gently at the closed door with his right front paw, his whining growing slightly more insistent. "Rex, what's got into you?" Rodriguez whispered, genuinely puzzled. He pressed his ear to the door and could hear muffled conversations inside adult voices, speaking in low, concerned tones. Nothing that should trigger such an unusual response from his partner. Through the reinforced glass window, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of the room's occupants, several adults in professional attire, clustered around what appeared to be a small figure seated in a child-sized chair. Even from his limited vantage point, he could sense the heavy atmosphere of sadness and frustration that seemed to permeate the space. Rex's whining intensified, and he began shifting his weight from paw to paw, behavior Rodriguez recognized as the dog's way of expressing urgency. But this wasn't the aggressive urgency that accompanied drug detection or threat assessment. This was something else entirely, something that seemed to bypass Rex's professional training and tap into a deeper, more instinctive part of his nature. Inside the waiting room, Detective Sarah Chun paused mid-conversation with Prosecutor Kim. "Do you hear that?" she asked, tilting her head toward the door. The distinctive sound of a dog's whine filtered through the walls, soft but persistent. Dr. Foster looked up from her notepad, where she had been documenting another failed attempt to engage Emma in conversation. "That's unusual," she murmured. "Dogs aren't typically allowed in this section of the building." But it was Emma's reaction that stopped everyone cold. For the first time in 4 months, the little girl's head turned toward a sound. Her dark eyes, which had remained fixed on invisible points in space, suddenly focused on the door with unmistakable interest. Her grip on the threadbare elephant loosened slightly, and her small body shifted in the plastic chair as if she was trying to get closer to the source of the whining. "My God," Dr. Foster whispered. "She's responding." Outside, Rodriguez found himself facing an unprecedented decision. Rex was clearly fixated on something or someone in that room, displaying behavior that defied his years of professional training. Every instinct told Rodriguez to trust his partner's judgment, but protocol demanded that they complete their security sweep and avoid unnecessary interactions with victims and witnesses. Rex looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes that had guided them through countless dangerous situations. In that gaze, Rodriguez saw something he had never witnessed before, not just professional duty or trained response, but genuine concern. It was as if Rex sensed that someone inside that room desperately needed his help, not as a law enforcement tool, but as a friend. The whining grew softer, more plaintive, almost like a song of comfort being offered to someone who couldn't yet hear it clearly. Rodriguez felt his throat tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. After a moment of internal struggle, he made a decision that would change everything. He knocked gently on the door. The gentle knock on the door seemed to reverberate through the sterile waiting room like thunder. Detective Chun exchanged a glance with Prosecutor Kim before moving cautiously toward the entrance. Through the reinforced glass, she could see a uniformed officer with a large German shepherd at his side. The dog's attention was completely focused on their door, his entire body language suggesting an urgency that transcended normal police protocol. Officer Rodriguez, K9 Unit, the man introduced himself as Chun opened the door. I apologize for the interruption, but my partner here. He gestured down at Rex, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. He's never behaved like this before. Something in this room has caught his attention, and in 3 years of partnership, I've learned to trust his instincts. Dr. Foster stepped forward, her professional curiosity overriding her initial concern about the unexpected interruption. We're conducting a therapy session with a traumatized child, she explained in hushed tones. She hasn't spoken in 4 months, and we're running out of time before. Her words were cut short by a sound that made everyone freeze. Emma had made a noise, not quite a word, but the first vocalization anyone had heard from her since that terrible October night. It was barely a whisper, more like a soft exhale, but in the context of her months of silence, it was as startling as a shout. Rex's ears shot forward, and his whining immediately changed pitch, becoming softer, more melodic. It was as if he was responding to Emma's tentative sound with reassurance of his own. A connection was instantaneous and inexplicable, transcending the barriers of species and circumstance in a way that left the adults speechless. May I? Rodriguez asked, gesturing toward the interior of the room. Something in his partner's behavior told him this was more important than security sweeps or standard protocol. Rex had never steered him wrong before, and today didn't feel like the day to start doubting that partnership. Emma's small head had turned completely toward the doorway now, her dark eyes wide with something that hadn't been there moments before. Hope. Her fingers, which had been clutching the threadbare elephant with desperate intensity, relaxed their grip slightly. For the first time in 4 months, she seemed to be truly present in the moment, rather than lost in traumatic memories. As Rex entered the room, time seemed to slow to a crawl. The massive German shepherd moved with deliberate gentleness, his usual confident stride replaced by careful, measured steps. His training had taught him to approach suspects with authority and force when necessary, but some deeper instinct was guiding him now, and understanding that this tiny human required something entirely different. Emma slowly slid down from her plastic chair, her bare feet touching the cold linoleum floor with the tentative curiosity of a child testing the temperature of bath water. She had been wearing the same purple dress with tiny flowers that the social worker had dressed her in that morning, and it seemed to emphasize just how small and vulnerable she was as she began to move toward this enormous animal that could have easily knocked her over with a casual nudge. The adults in the room held their collective breath, afraid that any sudden movement or sound might shatter whatever delicate magic was unfolding before their eyes. Detective Chun felt tears threatening to spill over as she watched the traumatized little girl take her first independent action in months. Even Mrs. Valdez, who had seen hundreds of traumatized children come through these doors, found herself gripping the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. Rex lowered himself to the floor without being commanded, dropping into a perfect downstay position that made him less intimidating to the approaching child. His tail, which had been wagging with increasing enthusiasm, slowed to a gentle, rhythmic sweep against the floor. Every line of his body language communicated safety, patience, and understanding in ways that human words had failed to achieve. Emma stopped just inches from Rex's massive head, her tiny hand hovering in the air, as if she was afraid this moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. Rex remained perfectly still, though his warm brown eyes never left her face. It was as if he understood that this was her choice to make, her moment to decide whether trust was possible again. "You're not scary," Emma whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. The words fell into the silent room like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples of shock and amazement through every adult present. Dr. Foster actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle the sound. Rex's response was immediate, but gentle, a soft whine that seemed to say, "No, little one, I'm not scary. I'm here to help." His tail wagged slightly faster, but he maintained his position, allowing Emma to control the pace of their interaction. Emma's small hand finally made contact with Rex's fur, her fingers threading through the thick, soft coat between his ears. The moment her skin touched his, both child and dog seemed to exhale simultaneously, as if some invisible tension had been released from the room. Rex leaned ever so slightly into her touch, providing just enough pressure to let her know he welcomed. A contact without overwhelming her with his size and strength. "You saw scary things too, didn't you?" Emma whispered directly to Rex, her voice gaining strength with each word. "The mean people who hurt others. But you're still brave, aren't you?" Rex's tail wagged more enthusiastically now, and he made a soft sound, part whine, part rumble. It seemed to communicate perfect understanding. It was as if this battle-hardened police dog, trained to face down armed criminals and detect dangerous substances, had found his most important mission in comforting a broken little girl. Dr. Foster wiped away tears she didn't realize she had been shedding, her professional composure completely abandoned in the face of this miraculous breakthrough. "Emma," she said gently, kneeling down to the child's level, "would you like to tell Rex about what happened to you and your mommy?" For a long moment, Emma continued stroking Rex's fur, seeming to draw strength from the contact. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a spark of life that had been absent for 4 long months. "Rex understands secrets," she said simply, as if this explained everything. "He knows about the scary things, but he's still good inside, just like me and Mommy." The room filled with the sound of grown adults, trying not to sob with relief and joy. After months of failed attempts, a police dog had accomplished what teams of trained professionals could not. He had given Emma Martinez her voice back. The emergency judicial conference convened in Judge Patricia Williams' chambers felt more like a war council than a legal proceeding. 23 years on the bench had prepared Judge Williams for many unusual situations, but nothing in her extensive experience had equipped her for the request now being formally presented by Prosecutor Janet Kim. The ornate mahogany desk that had witnessed countless plea negotiations and sentencing deliberations now bore the weight of a decision that could reshape courtroom procedure across the nation. "Your Honor," Kim began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing, "we're requesting permission for police dog Rex to remain present during Emma Martinez's testimony. In the past hour, this child has spoken more words than she has in the previous 4 months combined, and it's directly attributable to her connection with this animal." Defense attorney Michael Torres, a silver-haired veteran of high-profile cases, leaned forward in his leather chair with barely contained indignation. "This is absolutely preposterous, Your Honor. The prosecution is asking this court to turn a serious criminal proceeding into a three-ring circus. What's next? Therapy ponies? Emotional support peacocks? This sets a dangerous precedent that undermines the dignity and solemnity of our judicial system. Dr. Lisa Hoffman, who had been hastily summoned as an expert witness, spread several scientific journals across the conference table. Your Honor, the therapeutic value of human-animal bonds in trauma recovery is well documented. Children who have experienced severe psychological trauma often find it easier to communicate with animals before they can trust humans again. The presence of a calm, trained therapy animal can reduce cortisol levels, lower blood pressure, and create a sense of safety that allows traumatized individuals to access memories and emotions they've been suppressing. Judge Williams studied the unprecedented request with the gravity it deserved. Her chambers, lined with leather-bound legal volumes and framed photographs from decades of jurisprudence, had never hosted such an unusual debate. The afternoon sunlight streaming through her tall windows seemed to emphasize the weight of the the intersection of traditional legal procedure and innovative therapeutic intervention. Mr. Torres, she addressed the defense attorney, while I understand your concerns about precedent, this court has a responsibility to ensure that justice is served while protecting the welfare of vulnerable witnesses. Can you cite any specific legal statute that would be violated by allowing an emotional support animal during testimony? Torres rifled through his briefcase with the desperation of a man watching his case slip away. Your Honor, the presence of such an animal could be viewed as prejudicial to my client. The jury might be swayed by sympathy rather than facts. Additionally, there are no established protocols for handling therapy animals in criminal proceedings. What if the animal becomes disruptive? What if it influences the witness's testimony in unpredictable ways? Officer Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the legal proceedings, spoke up with the confidence of someone who had entrusted his life to his four-legged partner countless times. Your Honor, Rex is a professionally trained police dog with hundreds of hours of public interaction experience. His behavior is predictable and controlled. If you'll permit me to demonstrate his training and temperament. Judge Williams nodded, and Rodriguez gave a series of subtle hand signals. Rex immediately moved from his resting position to a perfect sit, then down, then back to sit, all without making a sound or breaking his focus. His movements were fluid and precise, demonstrating years of disciplined training that had made him an invaluable member of law enforcement. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, Rex has already proven his therapeutic value. Emma Martinez has been completely unresponsive to traditional therapy methods for 4 months. In 30 minutes with Rex, she's not only speaking but expressing complex thoughts and emotions about her trauma. That's not coincidence. That's the power of interspecies communication that we're only beginning to understand. Kim seized the opportunity to strengthen her argument. Your Honor, we're not asking for anything that would compromise the integrity of the trial. Rex would remain in a controlled position, similar to how court security officers remain present. The only difference is that his presence provides comfort to a traumatized child witness, potentially allowing her to provide crucial testimony that would otherwise be impossible to obtain. Dr. Hoffman added weight to the prosecution's position. With clinical expertise, studies from the University of California, Davis show that children with PTSD who interact with therapy animals show measurable improvements in their ability to recall and communicate traumatic memories. The animal's presence doesn't alter the memories. It simply provides the emotional security necessary for the child to access them safely. Torres played his final card with the desperation of a seasoned attorney facing an unwinnable situation. Your Honor, my client has a constitutional right to a fair trial. The emotional manipulation of allowing a sympathetic animal in the courtroom could prejudice the jury against him before any evidence is presented. This is exactly the kind of theatrical stunt that turns legitimate legal proceedings into emotional circuses. Judge Williams stood and walked to her window, gazing out at the courthouse steps where protesters had gathered with signs, reading "Justice for Maria" and "Protect Our Children." The weight of the decision was enormous. Too conservative, and a violent criminal might walk free. Too liberal, and she might set a precedent that could be exploited and abused in future cases. After several minutes of contemplation that felt like hours to everyone in the room, Judge Williams returned to her desk. This court recognizes that the law must evolve to serve justice while protecting the vulnerable. After careful consideration of the arguments presented, and in light of the expert testimony regarding trauma therapy, I am granting the prosecution's request with specific conditions. Torres's face went pale as Judge Williams continued. Rex will be allowed in the courtroom during Emma Martinez's testimony. However, he will remain in a controlled position with Officer Rodriguez at all times. Any disruption will result in immediate removal. Additionally, I will provide explicit jury instructions that the presence of the therapy animal is solely for the witness's comfort and should not influence their deliberations regarding the facts of the case. Kim felt her heart racing with a mixture of relief and anticipation. This was uncharted legal territory, but it might be Emma's only chance to find her voice and deliver the testimony that could put her stepfather behind bars where he belonged. Court will reconvene in 1 hour, Judge Williams announced. And may God help us all navigate this unprecedented situation with wisdom and justice. Legal history was about to be made, one small voice at a time. The historic courtroom fell into an almost supernatural silence as Officer Rodriguez guided Rex down the center aisle, their footsteps echoing against the polished hardwood floors like a ceremonial procession. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Journalists from major news outlets, legal observers, domestic violence advocates, and curious members of the public who had heard whispers of the unprecedented proceeding about to unfold. Camera flashes erupted from the media section until Judge Williams' stern gaze reminded everyone that photography was strictly forbidden during testimony. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to a chain around his waist. His usually arrogant demeanor had been replaced by nervous energy as he watched the massive German Shepherd take position near the witness stand. This wasn't part of his lawyer's strategy. The presence of this police dog represented an unknown variable that could destroy his carefully constructed defense of reasonable doubt and character assassination. Maria Martinez occupied the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. The physical scars from that terrible October night had mostly healed, but the emotional wounds were still raw and bleeding. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights filled with nightmares and guilt. She had blamed herself for not protecting Emma, for not leaving Marcus sooner, for creating the circumstances that had traumatized her baby girl. Today might finally provide the justice that could begin their healing process. Rex settled into his designated position with military precision, his body language calm but alert. Officer Rodriguez remained close, one hand resting lightly on his partner's head in a gesture of reassurance. The dog's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing quite like this. Yet his instincts told him that this moment was important, perhaps the most important of his entire career. Emma entered the courtroom holding Mrs. Valdez's hand, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing architecture of the judicial chamber. She wore a new yellow dress that social services had purchased specifically for this day, hoping the bright color would give her confidence. Her hair had been carefully braided with tiny butterfly clips, and she clutched the same threadbare elephant that had been her constant companion throughout this ordeal. The moment Emma spotted Rex, her entire demeanor transformed. Her hesitant steps became more confident, and for the first time since entering the building, she smiled a genuine expression of joy that made several jurors visibly emotional. Rex's tail began a gentle wag of recognition, his brown eyes never leaving the little girl who had somehow captured his protective instincts in ways his professional training had never anticipated. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Kim announced formally, "the people call Emma Martinez to the stand." Judge Williams leaned forward with unusual gentleness as Emma was helped onto the witness stand. A special booster seat had been installed to ensure she could see over the wooden barrier, and a child psychologist sat nearby, ready to intervene if the testimony became too traumatic. "Emma, sweetheart, can you see your friend Rex from there?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, her small hand waving at the German shepherd, who responded with what could only be described as a canine smile. "Hi, Rex. I told you I would see you again." The courtroom rippled with surprised murmurs. Defense attorney Torres shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing that his client's fate might rest in the hands of a 3-year-old who was having a conversation with a police dog. This was not the terrified, silent child he had been counting on to undermine the prosecution's case. Prosecutor Kim approached the witness stand with careful deliberation, her voice soft and encouraging. "Emma, do you remember me? We talked earlier about telling Rex what happened to your mommy." "Yes," Emma replied clearly, her eyes moving between Kim and Rex. "Rex wants to know about the scary man who hurt mommy. He said he would protect us if I told him the truth." Torres jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is attributing words to an animal that cannot speak. This is clearly overruled," Judge Williams said firmly. "The witness may continue." Emma turned her full attention to Rex, as if the packed courtroom had suddenly emptied except for the two of them. "Rex, remember when I told you about the mean man? He was really loud and scary, and he hurt mommy so bad that she couldn't get up anymore." Rex maintained perfect stillness, but his ears moved forward in what appeared to be attentive listening. His presence seemed to create an invisible bubble of safety around Emma, allowing her to access memories that had been locked away by trauma for months. "He hit mommy with his hands like this," Emma demonstrated with small fists hitting the air. "And then he pushed her down, and she made crying sounds, and then she didn't make any sounds at all. There was red on the floor, and I was scared he would hurt me too, so I hid in my closet." Maria Martinez sobbed quietly in the gallery, her heart breaking all over again as she heard her daughter's innocent words describing the brutal attack. Several jurors wiped their eyes, the raw honesty of a child's testimony cutting through any possibility of disbelief or skepticism. Marcus Webb's face had gone ashen. He whispered frantically to his attorney, but Torres looked equally stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Their strategy had been built on Emma's silence. Without her testimony, the case would have collapsed under reasonable doubt. Now, their star witness was not only speaking, but delivering devastatingly clear and specific details about the assault. "Emma," Kim continued gently, "can you tell Rex who this scary man was? Did you know him?" Emma's voice grew smaller, but remained audible throughout the silent courtroom. "It was Marcus. He lived with us, and sometimes he was nice, but that night, he was the scariest person in the whole world. He said bad words to mommy, and then he hurt her until she stopped moving." Rex's tail stopped wagging, and a low, almost inaudible growl escaped his throat, not directed at Emma, but seemingly in response to her words. Officer Rodriguez's hand tightened slightly on his partner's head, but the dog's protective instincts were clearly engaged. Even without human understanding of language, Rex seemed to comprehend that Emma was describing something terrible that had been done to someone she loved. "He broke mommy," Emma concluded simply, her child's vocabulary insufficient to describe the full horror of domestic violence, but somehow conveying its impact more powerfully than any adult testimony could have achieved. The courtroom remained frozen in absolute silence as the weight of a 3-year-old's words settled over everyone present. Justice had found its voice in the most unexpected form, a traumatized child, speaking to a police dog who had somehow given her the courage to remember and reveal the truth. The courtroom remained suspended in a profound silence that seemed to pulse with the weight of Emma's devastating testimony. Her small voice had just shattered Marcus Webb's carefully constructed defense with the brutal honesty that only a child could deliver. But Prosecutor Kim knew they needed more than heartbreaking words. They needed specific details that would seal the case beyond any reasonable doubt. "Emma," Kim continued with gentle persistence, her voice barely above a whisper to maintain. The intimate atmosphere between the child and her canine confidant. "Can you tell Rex what Marcus was wearing that night? Do you remember?" Emma's small fingers continued stroking the air, as if Rex were within reach, her eyes never leaving the German shepherd, who sat with unwavering attention. He had on his work clothes, the blue shirt with the oil stains that Mommy always tried, T.O. wash out, and his big boots that made loud noises on the kitchen floor when he walked around being angry. Defense attorney Torres felt his stomach drop. Those details matched exactly with the clothing found in Marcus Webb's abandoned apartment, evidence that had seemed circumstantial until now. Emma's innocent recollection was providing corroboration for physical evidence in ways that no adult witness could have managed. "Rex," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she found comfort in her one-sided conversation. "He threw Mommy's favorite coffee mug at the wall, and it broke into a million pieces. She started crying because her mommy gave her that mug. And then Marcus got even madder because she was crying." Maria Martinez gasped audibly from the gallery. That coffee mug had been a final gift from her deceased mother, and its destruction had been almost as painful as the physical assault. Emma had been watching from her bedroom doorway, witnessing details that investigators had never thought to ask about. Rex's ears twitched at the emotional intensity in Emma's voice, and he made a soft sound, not quite a whine, but a vocalization that seemed to encourage her to continue. Officer Rodriguez marveled at his partner's intuitive understanding of his role in this unprecedented situation. Rex had been trained to detect drugs and apprehend criminals, but somehow he had appointed himself as Emma's emotional guardian angel. "The scary part was when Marcus picked up the big knife from the sink," Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "He waved it around and said he was going to hurt Mommy so bad that she would never talk back to him again. That's when Mommy tried to run, but he caught her hair and pulled her back." The jury collectively leaned forward, hanging on every word. From this tiny witness, whose testimony was more compelling than any forensic evidence could have been. Juror number 7, a mother of 3 young children, wiped tears from her cheeks as she imagined her own daughter witnessing such horror. Marcus Webb's hands shook as he watched his fate being sealed by the very child he had terrorized into. Silence. His attorney had warned him that Emma might eventually speak, but they had gambled on trauma, keeping her quiet long enough for the case to collapse. Now, sitting in shackles while a 3-year-old calmly described his monstrous behavior. To a police dog, Webb realized his freedom was slipping away one innocent word at a time. "Then what happened, sweetheart?" Kim prompted gently, knowing they were approaching the most crucial part of Emma's testimony. Emma's small hand moved to touch her own cheek as she remembered. "Marcus hit Mommy with his fist right here, and blood came out of her nose and mouth. She fell down and didn't get up, but he kept kicking her in the stomach. I wanted to help, but I was too little and too scared." Rex's body tensed almost imperceptibly, his protective instincts responding to the distress in Emma's voice, even though the danger had long passed. His tail, which had been maintaining a gentle wag throughout the testimony, went still as if he understood the gravity of what he was hearing. "Rex, I tried to be brave like you," Emma continued, her words cutting through the courtroom like shards. of broken glass. But when Marcus looked at me standing in my doorway, his eyes were like a monster's eyes. He said if I ever told anyone what I saw, he would come back and hurt me too. That's why I couldn't talk before. I was too scared that he would find me. Torres made one final desperate objection. Your Honor, this testimony is clearly coached and, Mr. Torres, Judge Williams interrupted with ice in her voice. I suggest you remain seated. This court has never witnessed testimony more genuine or compelling. Emma turned back to Rex with the unshakable trust that only children can maintain in the face of overwhelming circumstances. But you're here now, Rex. You won't let the monster hurt me or Mommy anymore, will you? Rex's response was immediate and unmistakable. He rose to his feet and took a single step toward the witness stand, his body language radiating protective authority. Officer Rodriguez allowed the movement, understanding that his partner was making a promise that transcended professional training. This was personal now. No more monsters, Emma said with satisfaction, as if Rex had somehow confirmed her safety with that single step. Rex catches the bad people and puts them in timeout forever. The courtroom erupted in emotion that Judge Williams made no attempt to suppress. Several jurors were openly crying, and even the court reporter paused to wipe her eyes. In the gallery, domestic violence advocates embraced each other, recognizing that they were witnessing a watershed moment in the fight for justice. Marcus Webb slumped in his chair, his arrogant facade completely shattered. The child he had tried to intimidate into silence had become his judge and jury, delivering a verdict with the devastating power of absolute truth. His attorney's briefcase snapped shut with the finality of a coffin lid. There would be no recovering. From this testimony, Emma looked directly at her stepfather for the first time since entering the courtroom, her small face showing no fear, only the quiet strength that comes from having a protector nearby. You can't hurt us anymore, Marcus. Rex won't let you. The truth had been unleashed, and it was more powerful than any legal strategy or courtroom manipulation. Justice had found its voice in the form of a brave little girl and her unlikely guardian, proving that sometimes the most profound victories come from the most unexpected alliances. The prosecution rested its case on the word of a 3-year-old who had finally found the courage to speak her truth to the one friend who could truly understand her pain. The jury deliberation room buzzed with an intensity that veteran court observer Margaret Henley had never witnessed in her 40 years of covering criminal trials. Through the reinforced glass window, she could see the 12 jurors engaged in animated discussion, their faces reflecting the emotional weight of what they had just experienced. Some wiped their eyes with tissues, others gestured emphatically as they processed the unprecedented testimony they had heard from 3-year-old Emma Martinez. Inside the deliberation room, Foreman Robert Chun, a father of 2 young daughters, struggled to maintain his composure as he addressed his fellow jurors. In 23 years of jury service, I've never heard testimony more compelling or heartbreaking than what we witnessed today. That little girl's courage in facing her abuser while speaking to a police dog. It's something I'll never forget. Juror Patricia Williams, a retired school teacher who had worked with traumatized children throughout her career, nodded emphatically. The authenticity of her testimony was undeniable. Children that age cannot fabricate such specific, consistent details. Her descriptions matched perfectly with the physical evidence, the medical reports, and the crime scene photographs. In the courthouse hallway, media representatives from CNN, NBC, Fox News, and major newspapers across the country had set up makeshift broadcasting stations. The story of the little girl and the police dog was already trending on social media platforms worldwide. Legal experts were being interviewed about the precedent-setting nature of allowing therapy animals in criminal proceedings. While child advocacy groups hailed Emma's testimony as a breakthrough moment for victims' rights. Dr. Amanda Foster paced nervously outside the courtroom. Her professional concern focused entirely on Emma's psychological well-being. The little girl had just accomplished something that many adult survivors of domestic violence struggle to achieve. She had confronted her abuser and spoken her truth in a public forum. But the emotional toll of such an experience on a 3-year-old mind was still unknown territory. Emma herself sat in the victim services room with her mother Maria. Officer Rodriguez and Rex, the German Shepherd, had been given special permission to remain with the family during the deliberation period, his calming presence serving as an anchor for both mother and daughter as they waited for justice to be served. Emma was coloring in a new book that Mrs. Valdez had provided, occasionally looking up to smile at Rex, who lay contentedly beside her chair. "Mommy," Emma said softly, not looking up from her drawing of a little girl standing next to a large dog. "Rex says the scary man can't hurt us anymore. He says the nice people in the big room are going to make sure Marcus goes to timeout forever." Maria Martinez felt her heart clench with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her daughter's innocence had been shattered, but somehow, through her connection with Rex, Emma was finding the strength to heal and move forward. "That's right, baby. Rex is very smart, and he's going to help keep us safe." Back in the deliberation room, the discussion had moved beyond the emotional impact of Emma's testimony to the legal requirements for conviction. Juror Michael Torres, ironically, sharing a surname with the defense attorney, reviewed the evidence methodically. "We have Emma's eyewitness testimony, Maria's medical records showing injuries consistent with severe assault, blood evidence matching the victim, and the defendant's own clothing recovered from the scene. The prosecution has met every burden of proof required for conviction." Defense attorney Michael Torres sat alone at his table in the empty courtroom, staring at legal documents that now seemed meaningless. His client's fate had been sealed the moment Emma Martinez found her voice. No amount of legal maneuvering could overcome the devastating honesty of a child's testimony delivered with such compelling authenticity. Marcus Webb, who had declined to testify in his own defense, remained in his holding cell, finally understanding that his reign of terror had come to an end. Judge Patricia Williams used the deliberation time to research the legal implications of her decision to allow Rex in the courtroom. Early reports from legal scholars across the country were overwhelmingly positive, with many suggesting that her ruling would lead to expanded use of therapy animals in cases involving traumatized witnesses. The American Bar Association had already requested a full report on the proceedings for potential inclusion in future legal guidelines. After exactly 97 minutes of deliberation, remarkably fast for such a serious case, the jury sent word that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled rapidly with spectators, media representatives, legal observers, and domestic violence advocates who had gathered to witness what many considered a historic moment in American jurisprudence. Emma, accompanied by her mother and Rex, took her seat in the front row of the gallery. Officer Rodriguez positioned himself nearby, his hand resting protectively on his partner's head. The German Shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, his alert posture suggesting that he was ready to provide whatever comfort Emma might need. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Williams asked as the 12 jurors filed solemnly back into the courtroom. "We have, Your Honor," Foreman Sean replied, his voice carrying the weight of their unanimous decision. Marcus Webb was brought in wearing shackles, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he had worn during his brief period of freedom. His face had gone ashen, and his hands trembled as he stood beside his defeated attorney. "On the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." Emma looked up at Rex and whispered, "We did it, didn't we, boy?" "On the charge of domestic violence with great bodily injury, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." Rex's tail began a slow, satisfied wag, as if he understood that justice was being served. On the charge of child endangerment, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. The courtroom erupted in applause that Judge Williams made no attempt to silence. Emma clapped her small hands together with delight, turning to Rex with pure joy. The bad man has to go to timeout now, just like you said. Marcus Webb collapsed into his chair as the reality of his situation hit him fully. Facing a potential sentence of 25 years to life, his days of terrorizing women and children had finally come to an end. Justice had been served by the courage of a 3-year-old girl and the unwavering loyalty of a police dog who had given her the strength to speak. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Rex remained by Emma's side, his mission complete, but his commitment to her safety eternal. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most powerful alliances are forged between the most unlikely partners, and that truth, no matter how small the voice that speaks it, will always triumph over fear. 6 months after that historic day in the Riverside County Superior Court, the morning sun painted golden streaks across Meadowbrook Park as Emma Martinez raced through the grass with unbridled joy. Her laughter echoed across the playground where other children played, but her attention was focused entirely on the magnificent German Shepherd bounding toward her with his characteristic enthusiasm. Rex had grown even more protective and gentle in the months since the trial, as if he understood that his most important mission was ensuring Emma's continued healing and happiness. "Rex! Rex!" Emma called out, her small arms spread wide as she ran toward her 4-legged hero. She wore a bright red dress with yellow sunflowers colors that reflected the vibrant spirit that had fully returned to the little girl who had once sat in silent trauma. Her hair bounced in pigtails adorned with butterfly clips, and her smile could have powered the entire city with its radiance. Officer Rodriguez watched from a nearby bench with a sense of pride that transcended his professional accomplishments. In his 15 years of law enforcement, he had solved countless cases and apprehended dangerous criminals, but nothing compared to witnessing the healing power of the bond between his partner and this remarkable child. Rex had become something more than a police dog. He had become a symbol of hope and healing that was transforming lives across the nation. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department had officially launched the nation's first courthouse therapy dog program, with Rex serving as its pioneer and chief ambassador. The program had already assisted 17 other traumatized child witnesses, each finding their voice through the comfort and security provided by specially trained therapy animals. Requests for similar programs were pouring in from law enforcement agencies in 43 states, with the Department of Justice considering federal funding for nationwide implementation. Maria Martinez sat on a picnic blanket nearby, her own transformation evident in the peaceful expression that had replaced the haunted look she had carried for so long. The physical scars from Marcus Webb's assault had faded to thin white lines, but more importantly, the psychological wounds were finally healing. She had started a new job as a victim's advocate, using her experience to help other survivors of domestic violence find their own paths to justice and recovery. "Mommy, watch this!" Emma called out as she demonstrated the tricks Rex had been teaching her. The German Shepherd sat perfectly still while Emma placed a small treat on his nose, then gave him the command to catch it. Rex's precision and patience with the little girl had amazed everyone who witnessed their interactions. This was the same dog who could track down dangerous criminals and detect narcotics with unwavering focus. Yet he showed infinite gentleness with his tiny human partner. Dr. Amanda Foster arrived at the park, carrying a clipboard filled with research data that would soon be published in the American Journal of Child Psychology. Emma's case had become a landmark study in trauma recovery, demonstrating the unprecedented effectiveness of animal-assisted therapy in helping children process and overcome severe psychological trauma. Emma's progress had exceeded every professional expectation. her resilience serving as inspiration for therapists and researchers worldwide. Emma's emotional development has been remarkable, Dr. Foster explained to Maria as they watched the child play with Rex. Her nightmares have virtually disappeared. Her social interactions are completely normal for her age group. And most importantly, she's maintained her ability to discuss the traumatic events without experiencing psychological distress. Rex has provided her with a sense of safety and empowerment that traditional therapy methods simply couldn't achieve. The park was also home to other families whose lives had been touched by Emma and Rex's story. The Martinez family had become unofficial ambassadors for domestic violence awareness, with Maria speaking at conferences and Emma participating in child safety programs alongside Rex. Their message was simple but powerful. Courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most unlikely friendships can provide the strength needed to overcome even the darkest circumstances. News crews from 60 Minutes, Dateline, and Good Morning America had featured their story, bringing national attention to both the innovative use of therapy animals in legal proceedings and the ongoing crisis of domestic violence in America. Emma had become a symbol of hope for thousands of other children who had witnessed violence in their homes, showing them that their voices mattered and that healing was possible. Rex's own celebrity status had opened doors for important legislative changes. The Emma and Rex Act was currently being debated in Congress, proposing federal guidelines for the use of therapy animals in courtrooms and increased funding for programs supporting traumatized child witnesses. Legal experts predicted that the bill would pass with overwhelming bipartisan support, cementing the lasting impact of one little girl's courage and one police dog's compassion. As the afternoon sun began to set, Emma curled up against Rex's warm fur, using him as a living pillow while she read from her favorite book about a brave princess and her loyal dragon. Rex remained perfectly still, his patient devotion evident in every line of his powerful body. This had become their daily ritual, a quiet moment of connection that reinforced the unbreakable bond between them. "Rex," Emma whispered softly, her small hand stroking his soft ears. "Thank you for teaching me how to be brave. Before I met you, I forgot how to use my words, but you showed me that my voice was important." Rex's tail thumped gently against the grass, and he turned his head to nuzzle Emma's cheek with the tenderness that had made their partnership legendary. Officer Rodriguez felt his throat tighten with emotion as he witnessed this simple but profound moment of love and gratitude. The transformation was complete. A traumatized, silent child had become a confident, articulate little girl who understood her own strength and worth. Marcus Webb remained in state prison, serving a sentence of 28 years to life, his appeals consistently denied by courts that recognized the validity and power of Emma's testimony. Justice had been served, healing had occurred, and most importantly, a new model for helping traumatized children had been established that would benefit generations to come. As they prepared to leave the park, Emma hugged Rex tightly around his neck, whispering promises to see him again soon. The German Shepherd's protective instincts remained as strong as ever, but now they were focused on nurturing and encouraging rather than just guarding. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is the simple act of one being caring for another, regardless of species, size, or circumstance. Their story would continue to inspire others, but for now, it was enough. To know that a little girl had found her voice, a police dog had discovered his heart, and justice had prevailed through the most unexpected and beautiful of partnerships.